Maria's hands trembled as she watched the ambulance lights fade into the Seattle rain. Her husband Derek had collapsed at work, a stroke, they said. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the bills were already piling up faster than her paycheck from the diner could cover. She was 28 years old, married for 3 years, and suddenly drowning in a reality she'd never imagined. What she didn't know was that the elderly woman she'd see, pushing a cart through her neighborhood, the next morning would change everything. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Maria stood at her apartment window, watching the gray sky weep over the city. Her phone buzzed, another medical bill. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was hearing anymore. When she opened them, she saw her, an old woman in a tattered coat, bent over a garbage bin, carefully sorting through trash with weathered hands. Something twisted in Maria's chest. She grabbed her umbrella and the leftover breakfast she'd packed for work. "Ma'am?" she called out, approaching carefully. "Are you hungry?" The woman looked up, her face hidden beneath a dirty hood, eyes sharp and watchful. "I don't take charity," she said, her voice rough. "It's not charity," Maria said softly. "I made too much. It'll just go to waste." She held out the container, scrambled eggs, toast and fruit. "Please, it would make me feel better." The woman studied her for a long moment, then took the food with a slight nod. "You're kind." "Not many people are anymore. We all need help sometimes," Maria said, thinking of Derek in that hospital bed, tubes running from his arms. What Maria didn't know was that the elderly garbage collector was actually Richard Montgomery, a 72-year-old real estate mogul worth $43 million. And she definitely didn't know he was Derek's father, a man her husband had told her died years ago. The lie had started when Derek and his father had their falling out. Richard had wanted his son to take over the family business, but Derek had wanted to be a teacher. The argument had been bitter, filled with words that couldn't be taken back. Derek had told Maria his father was dead because to him he might as well have been. They hadn't spoken in 5 years, but Richard had kept tabs on his son. He knew about the marriage, about Derek's job at the elementary school, about the modest life they'd built. When he heard about the stroke through a private investigator he'd hired, something cracked in the old man's hardened heart. He wanted to know what kind of woman his son had married. He wanted to see if she was after money, if she'd abandoned Derek now that things were hard, if she was even worth knowing. So Richard had disguised himself. He'd dressed in clothes from a thrift store, dirtied his face with makeup, and taken to the streets around their neighborhood. He wanted the truth, and people only showed you the truth when they thought you had nothing to offer them. For 3 weeks, Maria saw the old woman almost every morning. Each time she brought food. Sometimes it was leftovers. Sometimes it was sandwiches she'd made specially. When the weather turned colder, she brought a blanket from home, one she and Derek had received as a wedding gift. "You shouldn't be giving this away," the disguised Richard protested, holding the soft fleece. "You need it more than I do," Maria said. "Besides, it's just a blanket. You're a person." One morning, Richard tested her. He knocked over a garbage can, spilling trash across the sidewalk. He wanted to see if she'd look at him with disgust, if her kindness had limits. Maria rushed over. "Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself?" She knelt in the dirty water, helping him pick up the scattered trash, her work uniform getting soaked and stained. "Why?" Richard asked, dropping the act for just a moment. "Why do you care?" Maria sat back on her heels, rain mixing with tears on her face. "Because my husband is in the hospital. And strangers, nurses, doctors, people we've never met, they're taking care of him. They're being kind when they don't have to be. How can I not do the same?" Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. Shame for the test, shame for the disguise, shame for the 5 years he'd let pride keep him from his son. That night, Richard went to the hospital. He stood outside Derek's room for 20 minutes, watching through the window as Maria held their son's hand, reading to him from a book about teaching methods he'd wanted to study. Derek's eyes were open now, but the stroke had affected his speech and movement. Recovery would be long and expensive. The next morning, Richard appeared at their door, not as the garbage collector, but as himself. Clean-shaven, in an expensive suit, looking every bit the millionaire he was. Maria answered, confusion crossing her face. "Can I help you?" My name is Richard Montgomery, he said, his voice breaking. I'm Derek's father, and I'm the person you've been feeding for 3 weeks. Maria's eyes widened. Derek said you were dead, I know. Richard's shoulders sagged. I let my pride kill our relationship. But you showed kindness to someone you thought was nobody. You gave away food you probably needed, blankets you couldn't afford to replace, time you didn't have. You did it expecting nothing in return. What are you saying? Maria asked, her hand gripping the doorframe. I'm saying I was wrong. About everything. About Derek choosing his own path. About what makes a person worthy. About what matters. He pulled out an envelope. This is a check for all of Derek's medical bills and enough to cover your expenses while he recovers. But more than that, I want to be in my son's life again. In both your lives. If you'll let me. Maria took the envelope with shaking hands, but her eyes stayed on his face. Derek needs his father. Not your money. Him. I know that now, Richard said. I tested you because I thought kindness could be faked. But you were kind when you thought I was nothing. When you had nothing to gain. You taught me that my son chose well. That he became a better man than I ever was. At the hospital that afternoon, Richard walked into Derek's room. His son's eyes widened, emotions flickering across his face. Shock, anger, confusion, and underneath it all, something that looked like hope. Dad? Derek's speech was slurred but recognizable. I'm sorry, Richard said, and he was crying now. This tough old millionaire who'd built an empire. I'm so sorry, son. I was wrong. About all of it. Derek looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. He reached out his functioning hand, and Richard took it. Stay, Derek managed to say. Always, Richard promised. In the months that followed, Richard kept his word. He came to the hospital every day, then to their home when Derek was released. He funded Derek's recovery, but more importantly, he showed up. He learned to help with physical therapy exercises. He listened to his son's stories about his students. He got to know Maria, the daughter-in-law who'd shown him what really mattered. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Derek improving daily, Maria laughing at one of Richard's stories, the old man felt something he'd been missing for years, family. I have a confession, Richard said. That first morning when you brought me breakfast, I almost told you to leave me alone. I was so certain I'd find out you were pretending that everyone had an angle. What changed your mind? Maria asked. You cried, Richard said simply. When I took the food, you got tears in your eyes. You weren't performing kindness. You were actually relieved to help someone. I'd forgotten people like you existed. Derek squeezed Maria's hand. I married up. You both taught an old fool that wealth isn't what you have in the bank, Richard said. It's what you're willing to give away. It's who you are when nobody's watching. It's the love you show when there's nothing to gain from it. The test had been Richard's, but the lesson had been his too. And in the end, the disguise hadn't revealed Maria's character. It had revealed his own. She'd been exactly who she appeared to be. He'd been the one wearing a mask all along, hiding from what really mattered behind walls of money and pride. Sometimes the greatest wealth is found not in what we own, but in who we become when we open our hearts to those who can offer us nothing in return but their humanity. And sometimes it takes losing everything or pretending to understand what was valuable all along.